Hey, howdy, this is Chris over at Prime PC Hardware. I am the guy who pretty much created Prime PC Hardware, and this is kind of just the start of many more videos and tips and upgrades and things like that to come. This is just part of the journey. There's a few just informational videos I want to put out there, and then this is just one of them. And I want to kind of make them somewhat short and to the point, but still capturing a lot of the detail that matters. So just to get kind of right into it, we're talking today about new GPUs. Primarily on the AMD side, we're talking about heat and junction temperatures. This is something that I've seen that has been brought up a lot in the North Carolina PC forums and just Reddit in general a lot. I mean, you can search it out there, you'll find plenty of threads about it. What the problem ends up being, and I feel like it kind of relates to all newer GPUs in general and the way that we're going with it, and I'll kind of explain my theory behind it, because at the end of the day there is no real guaranteed answer, or this is what this is, or whatever, because the GPU manufacturers don't tell us a lot. But this is just kind of my like I said, my take on it, just from working on computers a lot, especially in the last year or so, specifically more with AMD. It seems like more people are going AMD nowadays because of the price of performance. Okay, so the topic, just to get right to it, is GPU junction temperatures. A lot of people on the AMD side, it's been a big problem. People are saying, "Oh my God, my junction temperatures are getting to 110 degrees." Or my junction temperatures are 100 degrees. What should I do? My GPU is overheating. Is this a problem? Should I be worried about this? First and foremost, I would like to say, from working with multiple higher end AMD cards, mid-tier cards, pretty much the whole 6000 series line, no, you should not be worried about your junction tip being 110. Obviously, that is on the hotter side, but I don't think that a lot of people understand the purpose behind what the junction temp does. So what the junction temp does is it's kind of a metric that is put there for you. And honestly, I feel like GPUs have had junction temp sensors for a lot longer than what we know, but AMD was brave enough to give us that metric. Now, why did AMD give us that metric is the question. And to be quite honest with you, it is because I feel like AMD cards are a lot more tuner friendly nowadays. So let's first talk about the purpose of what the junction temperature serves and why I don't necessarily think you should be worried about it being 110. Now, that's not optimal. It's not. And you can get it lower. That's not my point here. But as far as you being worried like your GPU's overheating, I wouldn't say so. And this is why. Now, I have seen cards that 100, they don't get to that 110 degrees, and it takes them a while to heat up, and this could just be from, quality control from AMD, especially with all the COVID shit going on, but it also depends on what card you have. Do you have a reference model versus do you have the higher end models? What model do you have? And it seems like it's more prevalent the higher end you go. So 6900 XT reference versus 6900 XT Strix or whatever are going to perform very differently thermally. It may not make as much of a difference if you're buying a 6600, but it will make a difference when you're buying a 6900. And here's why. So the junction temp serves as a point of reference for thermal throttling, right? So your card is designed to boost up much past what it was actually, what the manufacturer states. So I think the manufacturer states for the 6900 XT, for example, we're going to use that card because that's a card that I run in my rig, and mine gets kind of hot a lot of times. Let's use that as an example. So you have manufacturer, if you look up what the boost clock is on the 6900 XT, it says the max boost clock is 2250, I believe, somewhere in that range. Don't quote me on that, but I know it's somewhere in that range. 2250 megahertz. Okay. Once you load it up, you download the drivers for that card. The card will then default to about 2525 megahertz or 2550 megahertz, somewhere in that range. Which, if you look on the website, is about 200 give or take more megahertz than what it's supposed to be clocked out of the box. So why does this happen? That's because these cards are boosting. These cards have a lot more boost than what they used to boost back in the past with, former GPUs and things like that. I feel like that's the way that we're going with the 4090, 4080 cards, with these big heat sinks and, the software's designed for them, the driver softwares. I feel like if you think about in the past, the 1080 series came out, then you had a couple years before the 20 series came out. Technology advanced, they were able to manufacture something a little bit faster, a more efficient process. Now with the current GPU market, it seems like we're getting GPUs a lot earlier than what we used to, and I think this is due to the fact of not necessarily the technology advancing, which is why you see a much bigger price tag on the GPU, right? You're seeing price tags of $1,500, $1,600, where back in the day, an 80 series GPU was not that much, and that's because the technology has not advanced that much for the process to become cheaper. What they're doing is they're finding ways to boost the old technology a little bit better. Now, I'm not saying it's one-to-one like a 4080 is the same thing as a 3080, but the technology is not as different. So what they have to do is they pour more money into it and find ways that they can boost it more efficiently. Take somewhat of the same architecture and boost those clocks higher, safer, right? So what does this require? It requires better cooling, which is why you see these 4080, 4090s cards thick. They're thick, they got big copper heat sinks on them. They're, a whole bunch of fins, and they're thick. That's because these cards draw a lot more power than their predecessors. I mean, we're talking 400, 300, 400 watts, 450 watts, with transient spikes, with big spikes up to, 500, 450, 500 watts sometimes. So, I mean, why is a card doing this? That's because, like I said, taking that same basis of that technology from the generation before, how can we push more frequency, push faster speeds, but keep it stable? And I feel like that's kind of where we're going right now, since we don't have as much split difference between 30 series, 40 series, 6900, 7900 series. There's not much of a split difference. So they're focusing on boost. So where does GPU junction temperature come into play when this happens, and why you shouldn't be worried necessarily about 100 degrees, 110 degrees on your GPU? So let's use a 6900 XT, for example. That junction temp clock was given to you as a metric for tuning. AMD has even stated that, up to around 110 degrees is fine. That's normal. Now, it doesn't mean that you want your GPU pegged at that all the time, because obviously for longevity, that's not going to be great. It still may last its lifetime that's expected to, but that, you could always push more life out of it. So we'll go over some ways to get that junction temp down later. But why, if you're a normal gamer, you shouldn't be worried about it unless you're just going way past 110 degrees. So the junction temp is a combination of sensors on the die at the hottest part on the die. And what this does is it allows it to thermal throttle the die to control the actual, or the GPU temperature, which is, what MSI Afterburner is going to show you, what NVIDIA shows you, things like that, is what we've been using for our metrics forever. Okay? And usually the thermal limit on your current GPU temp, which is your overall GPU temp, is around 95 degrees, right? So your junction temp has a higher thermal limit. And that's because it's using those sensors to throttle before the actual whole GPU temp gets too hot. So that way you don't have, you're not reaching those thermal limits on your GPU. It's throttling down before you ever get there. So it uses that as a point. How far can we boost the card? How far can this card boost, before we're over that 110 degrees? Because once it starts creeping up over that 110 degrees, that's when, it's going to start throttling back. And, if you were to go over that 110 degrees and it was allowing the card to go over that 110 mark, around that 110 mark, then you're going to see your GPU temp overall increase, which is going to cause severe performance loss. So what this prevents is, is kind of controlling the boost to keep you in a sweet spot. So the reason why you have people who have, I'm only getting 65 degrees junction temp, I'm getting 75 degrees junction temp, is because it really depends on the load you're putting on your GPU. I can play some games right now. I have a ultra-wide 100 hertz monitor, 1440p. 3560 by 1440 or whatever the resolution is. And I can play games. Call of Duty doesn't hit 100 degrees on the junction temp if I have VSync on. Or I can play certain games, ultra settings, max them out, doesn't hit 100 degrees junction temp. Now, if I run some GPU compute test and really stress the GPU out, like full pegged 2600 megahertz, and it's just pulling, it's going to hit those junction temps. And it's designed to, because it's boosting the card as much as it can. God, I cannot talk. Before it throttles it back. So that's showing that my card is pushing itself to its absolute limits. And it's still remaining within safe temperature, because safe temperature on your junction temp, other than your actual GPU temp is about 95 degrees, somewhere around that before you start getting concerned. Your junction temp is really, I think, if I'm not mistaken, it was about 118 to 120 degrees before it reaches a unsafe limit and will cut the computer off. Okay? And most modern hardware has these safety parameters on there. So if you're a regular gamer and you're gaming at 1080p or 1440p, more than likely, majority of your time, unless you're just gaming at, VSync off or G-Sync off or FreeSync in this case, and you're just gaming, and you're reaching those temps, you do not have to worry about this unless your computer's cutting off, thermal throttling, and you're just having bad performance issues, because it is designed to those junction temperatures to get high, because it's literally using those sensors to control the boost on the card. So depending on how well your die was made, and how much it can handle, is kind of where you're going to get higher temps, lower temps, higher frequencies, lower frequencies. But this is a point of reference for your boost. Okay, so if you lower these numbers, what you can do is you can actually keep it in boost longer before it thermal throttles back. And that's just kind of how these new cards are designed. They're designed almost like, think about taking a car, slapping a big turbo on it, putting E85 in it, and you're putting that E85. The E85 acts like coolant almost for the motor, so you're able to push a little bit more boost out of it. That's kind of like how it is with these computers. The junction temp is just a sensor inside of the GPU that is almost like a smart sensor, so to speak, to control the boost on the GPU, so your actual GPU temperatures never get so high to where you start massively losing performance. Because if you pay attention to your core clock, and you pay attention to those temperatures, when it starts getting up to that about 100 to 110 degree mark, you start throttling back about 20 to 50 megahertz, and it will stay 20 to 50 megahertz, maybe 100, within that range, and then you'll start seeing the numbers fall back. You may gain a little bit more, gain a little bit less, and that's why it's controlling. So with that being said, what you're preventing is from your GPU temp altogether getting hotter and then taking a massive hit, because it is really going to start thermal throttling back. So this metric was put here in the software, especially on AMD side, to aid us in tuning, because I do feel like AMD is more of a tuner, so to speak, card. Usually, just in my experience, I've got a water-cooled RTX 2080 Super system behind me, right? Full custom water-cooled loop, i7 9700K. It's just the one I have plugged in for my TV over here to play, controller games. What I will say is, in general, I've been able to push a little bit more out of the AMD cards recently than I can out of my NVIDIA cards from the factory. And maybe that's just because it's a 2080 and not a 3080, 3090. Maybe that's what it is. I've had more experience with 6800 XTs, 6900s, 7900s, things like that. But what this metrics allows you to do is you can actually play around with the settings, adjust your fan curves, undervolt, underclock, things like that, to keep that temperature down. That way that you can see your card stay into boost frequencies longer. So while you may be able to pull 2500 megahertz for a few seconds, or 2600 megahertz for a few seconds on the card before it starts thermal throttling, maybe if you dial it back 20 megahertz or 25, decreases the junction temp enough for you to actually stay at maybe 25, 75 longer, 10, 20 seconds longer than what you could at 2600. So you actually stay in a higher frequency for longer. So that's what the junction temp metric was put there for. Now, let's talk about where this comes into place with us, right? What can we do to lower this junction temp? Because obviously, while I'll say 110 is not something you necessarily need to be worried about, or 100 to 110, I wouldn't want my GPU pegged at 110. I'm all for cooling. Obviously, I got a full custom water cooled loop behind me. I've got, my CPU's on liquid in my system. I haven't put my 6900 XT on liquid yet, but it is a plan. So where it comes in for us is what we can do is we can undervolt. And this is all given to us in the AMD software. We can undervolt. We can play with the fan curves and things like that. And shortly here I'll show you kind of what I have. And I'm going to show you an example on some things you can do. I'll use Call of Duty for example, and we'll go through kind of what you can do with it. So, aggressive fan curve. If you are worried about your junction temp being high, 95, 100, 105 degrees, 110 degrees. There are ways you can lower it drastically, and AMD gives us all these tools to do it. And like I said, some cards are going to have more issues than others, and I'll go into why I think that is here in a little bit. But so some cards, the cards that are getting hot, if you want to lower your temperatures, aggressive fan curve. The fans never hit 100% within the software. Usually it is a very, very low fan curve, and that seems to be the issue, especially with reference coolers. Up your fan curve. If you don't want to go to 100%, go to 90, go to 80. It will get loud, but I mean, with the power these cards are pushing, if you really care about the cooling, you don't want to see those temps, is something you have to do. Okay, up your fan curve, up every dot there. Take 0 RPM off. It will keep it cooler. Have it get cooler quicker than what it would on the stock fan curve. That will kind of prevent it from getting too hot too fast. So that's the way that kind of works. And then we have undervolting, underclocking, overclocking. Okay, so undervolting. How does this work? And this is kind of a newer premise to a lot of PC gamers, PC enthusiasts, or people who are just getting into it. I mean, people who are super old school know about undervolting, but it's kind of just been made more mainstream recently, so to speak. Undervolting is limiting the voltage that your graphics card is pulling to the die, right? And some people don't know how this works. It works just like overclocking. You adjust the metric, you see what's stable, run some benchmarks, download Passmark or 3D Mark or whatever you use, and lower it by 25, right? I mean, I've seen people get theirs as low as 1,050, 1,020, depending on where you want your core clock to be at. But this will drastically decrease your temps. And AMD gives us this right in the tuning software on the drivers. For a reason, because what you can do is try undervolting it by 50 millivolts. Try it. Just try it on your TPU right now. I guarantee you will see a difference in heat. And what this does is it allows us to have more time between the time that our GPU heats up, and it also allows us to stay in boost longer, because since it's taking more time for the GPU to heat up and get to those throttling speeds, it's allowing us to stay in a higher frequency for much longer, which results in more frames, and it results in less time, less frame loss, right? The lower you get this number, the longer you're able to stay in boost. You know what I mean? The longer you're able to boost up to those 2600 megahertz before it throttles anything back. And that results in more performance. Yes, you have less voltage to the die, which results in less heat, but you can still push the same frequencies as long as you kind of calibrate everything together. And there's a lot of videos out there. I'll link some below so you guys can look at them. There's a lot of videos out there on that. I'm gonna go through a little bit on it on this video, kind of just showing you on Call of Duty. But that is definitely the first way that I would recommend if you have an AMD GPU, or if you have an NVIDIA GPU, you're getting high temps, or you just feel like your card's underperforming. Undervolt it slightly and just go from there. See how far you can undervolt it before it starts being unstable. Always use, Passmark, something like that, to stress test it. That way you can get, quick affirmation that it's good, that the undervolt is good. Next thing that you can always do on these GPUs, and the reason why you get a lot of people who say, oh, well, I'm getting, I've only ever hit 75 degrees on my junction temp. The reason a lot of these people only ever hit 75 degrees, and this is just my take on it, is because most people are not utilizing their GPUs to their full potential. They're just not. With these 4080s, 4090s, if you look on the Steam charts, most people are not playing in 4K. There's a little bit more people playing in 1440. A lot of people are still playing in 1080p. Regardless if you're playing in a high refresh, 144 hertz, whatever, a 6900 XT, 6800 XT, even a 6700 XT is going to kill 1080p. and it's not going to really put a lot of stress on the GPU, especially depending on what game you're playing. And a lot of people are playing games that have been out for years. CSGO, League of Legends, Dota, I mean, even Destiny. I mean, you got all these games that have been out for years. They're not really that graphically intense. Yes, your junction temps will be lower. Now, when you start running compute test or something that has a lot of physics involved in it, then you're going to see those temps rise for sure. But you know, a lot of people are playing like that. A lot of people are playing with their V-Sync enabled or their G-Sync enabled. And this is something you should do if you're a PC gamer. Big misconception is that you never enable V-Sync because you want all the frames possible. That is not true. You need to be running at your monitor's native refresh rate, because if you are not, all those extra frames is going to cause screen tearing, and you're not going to be able to take advantage of those extra frames because your GPU is moving so much faster than your monitor. So if you are having issues with screen tearing and you're having issues with your game feeling kind of stuttery and laggy, enable VSync so it will sync up with your monitor's refresh rate and they will work hand in hand together. What this will also do is limit your GPU from pushing too far, pushing 170 frames when you can only take advantage of 100, and it will, you know, help the longevity of your GPU. So this will also bring your junction temps down. A lot of people are not playing 4K 120 frames. They're just not. And that's what a lot of these cards nowadays can do. Even if it's at medium settings, low settings, high settings, they're able to do 4K gaming. And a lot of people are not doing 4K. So yes, when I play at 1440p on Call of Duty, I can get 70 degrees junction temp. But that's because I'm locked at 100 frames on 1440p, and my card can do more than that. So that's something that you run into a lot. Now, another way to get your junction temps down is you can, you know, underclock. And a lot of people are like, why would I want to do that? Why would I want to, you know, limit my GPU's performance? And that goes to say, you know, exactly what I just said. A lot of people are not using their full GPU. You know, they're not gaming at 4K. They have a very high-end GPU, very capable GPU. 6700 XT is even very capable. I ran one as my daily driver for a long time. You aren't using your whole, you know, your whole capability of your GPU. So if you underclock it, it will severely help your temps, and your performance will stay the same. And I'm going to demonstrate that here in Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 in just a minute. I'm going to clock mine at 2600, which is a slight overclock on the default settings in AMD. But mind you, the card's only really rated to run at 2250 from the website on the reference cooler. So what I'm going to do is show you AMD settings, you know, 2600 megahertz, and then I'm going to show you 2250 if I limit it at 2250 and then run the same game and show you if I have any performance loss and show you how much better my temps are. So, like I said, this really all comes down to performance versus temps. The way that they are pushing performance on these new cards is they're drawing more power. More power comes more heat, and overall, you know, this junction temp, when it was added in, caused a lot of people to panic because they're not paying attention anymore to that current temp, which is really the one that you want to keep an eye on because that's really what your longevity has always been based off of for a long time. Now, like I said, I'm all for cooling. I'm going to show you a few ways to get that junction temp down so you can get even more longevity out of your products, because obviously heat kills, and you know, I'm not saying it's an ideal situation to have it at 110. I'm just saying for your normal, average, everyday person, don't worry about it. Don't take your GPU and take it apart. There's a reason AMD has been denying these RMAs, and that they're getting, you know, they're accepting some of them, but for the most part they're denying a lot of them, and this is the exact reason. I mean, they don't come out and say this, but this is the reason. This is a tuning metric feature. That is what it is, and it was put there for us to be able to tune our GPUs to our liking. Now, one last thing that I want to mention is one of the big problems that I think is kind of coming out of a lot of these GPUs, and why you see a lot of GPUs actually ending up messed up, because I have seen some with some thermal issues, and it comes down to this because I've seen it firsthand. I had a GPU, one of the AMD GPUs that I've had come in that had this issue, is that a lot of people, what this metric that they added is causing is havoc and misunderstanding, which is why I'm making this video. And there's some other videos out there like this, but, you know, just not as in depth and don't really explain things as well. So people are seeing this number, they're freaking out. Oh my God, my car's running 110 degrees. What's wrong with it? Okay, I'm going to take it apart, replace the pads. And this is happening, and I've seen it on Reddit. You can read it almost every post that's talking about this. Somebody's like, oh yeah, I took mine apart, replaced my pads. Why is this a problem? Back in the day, when I used to, back in 2015, 2014, whenever, when I had, 970 or whatever it was back then, you did not have to replace the thermals on the car. I gamed on that card for like 3-4 years and it was running fine. Never, still to this day, that card's still running. Thermals are still fine. And now we have people who cards are 1-2 years old and they're like, oh my god, my thermals are fucked. They're messed up. We gotta fix something. I gotta take it apart and slap new thermal pads. This is a bad idea because this is exactly what has happened and exactly why there's so many AMD cards out there that are actually messed up. What people are doing is seeing this number, reading on Reddit, taking advice from somebody who doesn't really know about it. Then they're taking their card apart, ordering thermal pads, thermal paste, things like that. The card comes with thermal pads on the die, comes with thermal pads on the GPU, on the modules, right? So whenever they take these apart, they replace them. And the issue is these coolers are, like, the tolerances are very, very tight. And if you use the wrong size thermal pad, or you cut them wrong, or you don't cut them out correctly, or you don't place them on there correctly, or if you go from using a thermal pad on the die to a thermal paste, what this does is the heat sink will not sit properly on the GPU when you put it back together if you are not absolutely careful about putting it back together the right way and making sure everything is touching. And what is happening then is the card is actually overheating. Junction temps are going to 112, 115, and they're sitting there and they turn the system off. And they will turn the system off. So don't think that if your system's not turning off, that's a good sign. And you probably don't have a thermal issue. Because when that system really does hit its thermal limits, it will turn your system off. I know from firsthand. I've seen it happen. Had to take a card apart and come to find out they replaced the pad with thermal paste, very thin thermal paste, didn't even put enough on there, cut new pads out, and didn't really cut them out like they were supposed to, and they're real thick. So the cooler was not even making contact with the actual die. So you could see the bubbles on the 6900 XT where it was not even making contact. So that's a problem because that is overheating and it's not making good contact. Had to take the card apart. I didn't have any thermal pads on me at the time, so, well, not for the die, not a big enough one for the die. So I replaced all the other thermal pads and put, thicker thermal paste on there and, really globbed it on there and then made sure I put it back on, made sure it was seated properly. Card's running great now. Junction temps are a lot lower. It's not thermal throttling. Before, it wouldn't even boost over 2300 megahertz without turning off. It wouldn't boost past factory specs without turning off. So I think we have an overabundance of problems of people buying these AMD cards, buying, maybe even on the NVIDIA side, I've seen more on the AMD side though, buying these cards, thinking they have a problem because they're looking at junction temps, being misinformed, taking the cards apart, trying to fix them, fucking them up, putting them on Marketplace, selling them to somebody else. They end up with a messed up card. They end up posting about it or selling it on eBay, and then they can't RMA them. They don't know what's wrong with them, and they end up selling them and going back to NVIDIA. And we have a lot of people coming over from NVIDIA who don't necessarily understand these things. It is kind of new to all of us, honestly. But that is where the GPU junction tip comes into play. And I hope I explained it well enough. I think I did. I know this video has been kind of long, but hopefully I did explain it well enough for you guys to kind of understand. It is basically a boost controller. What it does is it calculates the hottest point in the die before the whole die heats up. That way it can throttle before the die ever gets to a point where you suffer a severe performance loss. These cards are made to boost. The technology is not much different. If you look at the 6900 XT versus 6800 XT, essentially the same card with a little, I think it's, maybe like 10%, 11% more compute components. It's essentially the same card that can draw more power and boost higher. That's all it is. But it gets a lot more performance. Well, maybe not a lot, but, it's more powerful than the 6800 XT. And that's kind of the pattern I'm seeing. So with more power is always going to come more heat. You can manage that. They give us the tools to manage it. It is a little bit time consuming, but at the end of the day, if you can game at 4K 120 frames per second, what are we complaining about? So now I'm going to kind of go into showing you guys a little bit about what you can do in a few ways that you can fix this. And like I said, I'm going to chop this video up. Hopefully it's not too long. We'll go into the Call of Duty segment using Modern Warfare 2. I'm going to show you guys some ways to fix this. Or not to fix it necessarily, but if you really care about your cooling, your temps, longevity, I'm going to show you some ways to fix that on a 6900 XT reference model, which is a hot card. It heats up quickly, and those junction tips get up there. But I rarely ever see my current GPU tip get over 80 degrees, if that. But I'm going to show you how low I can actually get it without losing any performance. Okay, and this is kind of like your worst case scenario because it's 6900 XT air cooled reference model card, which is, you know, usually not the best coolers. So we'll go over that now, and then, you know, I'll see you there. Alrighty, here we go. So I'm just going to show you a few small things here of just kind of the setup that I've got going on the 6900, and I've been running for a long time. No issues, hours of gaming, no power offs, anything like that. We'll go over that. But this is the setup that I have going on. So this is your voltage here. This is your millivolts. So what you're going to do is you can lower this. Usually it's at stock 1175. Lower it to 1150. And then you can keep your boost clock at whatever you want it, whatever it's been stable for you. 2600 is not the max I can push this card to, surprisingly. So this card really has a lot of boost in it. I can probably push this to 2650. But I'm not going to do that. It's just no point. 2600 runs fine. And usually, you know, you knock it down to 1150. And then you knock it down to 1125, then knock it down 25 more, and keep going until you find some instability. Usually that's going to be, you could probably even push it to, you know, 1075. It's going to depend on your card, though. This is my fan curve here. This is very, very aggressive, I'll be completely honest with you, but I don't care, because I'd much rather replace my fans and replace my GPU sooner or later in the future. So the fans are, I'll put this bitch on water. I don't care. But yeah, the fans are ramping up. They're hitting 100% right around 100 degrees junction. And it's aggressive just to kind of keep it from getting there quicker. So you can just use these as kind of points of contact, you know, here, there, and then whenever I'm not gaming on it, though, I mean, I'll just be completely honest with you, I do enable 0 RPM just to keep the fans from spinning, you know, too much. So I do that, you know, because obviously fans have life as well. You don't really have to worry about it as much, but just for your peace of mind. I have my VRAM tuning here on. It's on fast timing, and I have it 2100. I have ran it on 2150 as well, but just for the sake of the video, this doesn't really do much for performance in the game anyway. So I'm going to show you this setup here. This is usually I think stock is like 2550 or 2525. Megahertz on the max frequency, but we're going to put it at 2600 just to prove my point. Okay, we'll leave it at 2600, and I'll show you the junction temps on what it's running at. I'm going to leave VSync on my setup and all that kind of stuff, just to show you like a real world, you know, kind of explanation of how this goes. So 1125 on the voltage, 2600 on the frequency, 2000 on the minimum frequency. Okay. As you can see, this is kind of a, you know, just menu. And at the menu, I mean, like I said, this is a reference model overclocked card. It's already running at 53, 54 degrees on the CPU, 64 here. Not a big difference, though. I mean, it is running at 2200, 2295 on the fucking core clock. So, I mean, that's good. That's good performance. It's not throttling back. I mean, that's safe. It does heat up quick, but this is a reference card. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna jump in the game real quick. All right, let's see. All right, let's look here. Let's see. All right, so you see we're getting about 100 frames. This is VSync enabled, so it's not gonna really go over 100. It's gonna hover right there on 100. You guys know how VSync works. I have FreeSync enabled as well. But you're going to see the temps here, and this is just with a custom fan curve and a slight undervolt, and running about 2600 megahertz. And this is on Call of Duty, so it's going to push kind of hard. This is at ultra wide 1440, all ultra settings, no DLSS or, well, not DLSS is AMD, but no FSR enabled. So we don't have any FSR enabled, so this is all native resolution, and this is going to push the card a little bit further. There's a drastic difference between 1440 just regular and ultra wide 1440. So with 21/9. So just so you guys know that this is essentially not as crazy as running 4K, but it's right there. It's at 4K ultra. But we'll look at the temps. So we're gonna monitor the junction temps. So I mean, right now we're looking at 66 on the GPU, which is, you know, more than cool enough if you were on an NVIDIA card or whatever and looking at that. And you're going to look at the junction temp was around 90 degrees. But we're not taking full utilization of the GPU because we have a VSync turned on. Okay. But that's still reasonable. You know, those temps are still reasonable. This would be your person who says, "Oh, I never get around 100, 110 degrees on the junction temp because they're gaming and, you know, with VSync on and enabled all things like that." Now, what I could do is, if I really cared about my temps, is I could turn on FSR, which is upscaling, which is not native resolution, and it would be a drastic, you know, decrease in temps on the GPU because the GPU doesn't have to work as hard. But that's not what we're trying to prove here today. As you can see, I mean, it keeps it pretty cool. You know, my junction temp gets up there, 80 degrees, 90 degrees. Still get pretty much a locked 100 frames. Okay, so, I mean, that's that. Now what I'm going to show you is an underclock. Now, I've already undervolted it, and I could probably undervolt it a slight bit more, and I'll even show you. We'll do it real time. Let's do this. This shouldn't affect anything. So if I do, let's say I go all the way to 1100 on the voltage. Let's see how much that lowers our temps here. I mean, we already, yeah, drastic difference already. We just seen like almost, what, 5 degrees? Now it's not wanting to go above 90. We just lowered it just slightly. Now it doesn't give us a real performance gain in this game, because we are obviously not pushing the GPU, and I'm not even trying to play right now, just kind of bullshitting. But yeah, now you see, look. So now what we're gonna do is I'm going to limit that GPU clock here to 2250, which is the manufacturer's boost clock for this reference card. And my theory here is that maybe these are not card specific to like the drivers and how much they boost. Maybe this boost on a Strix card is fucking perfect. It doesn't cause any high temps or anything like that. But what I'm thinking is that they put a boost across the board on these cards, and some of the coolers just could not handle the boost they put on here. So we're going to do a 2250, and I'm going to show you the difference here. And we'll see the difference in performance, you know, anything like that. So limited 2250. We're in game, okay? Watch this. Junction temp is already much lower than what it was before. I think sitting in the menu before was 75, whatever. It's getting up there before it, you know, the fans would kick in and it would draw it back a little bit. But you know your cooling's working. If this number is, you know, consistently coming down, your cooling is working. If that number is just going up and getting pegged, that's when you have a cooling. And this all I did was back to the manufacturer's boost clock, 2250. The drivers boost it more, but the manufacturer on the website says 2250 on for the reference card. So let's see. Is the AMD drivers pushing it far for the boost for the 6900 XT? Is the performance we're getting out of some of these new graphics cards specifically coming from the boost that the drivers allowing them to boost at? So look, we're pegged at 100 frames. Same game. Look at the temps. Look at the junction temp. And this is supposed to be what the factory boost at. Ginormous difference. We're talking a 20-30 degree difference just by limiting it. No performance loss in this game. Now if you're gaming at 4K, you're gaming, you know, at some of these high resolutions, and maybe, but what I'm saying, for most cases, if you really care about your temps, figure out a sweet spot. That's what this tuning is for. That's what that junction temp is for. As you can see now, we're standing at 60 degrees, 70 degrees on the junction, which is crazy. Plus, look at the power consumption, much less. But we're still getting the same performance. Now, how does this affect your benchmarks, things like that? Well, obviously, it's going to affect them a little bit more because those are how far can you push your GPU. But you shouldn't be worried about temps as much in benchmarks. If you're just literally putting stress tests on your GPU, it's supposed to stress it out. But this is real-world performance here. Fans don't ramp up as much. heat stays lower, power consumption's lower, same performance. Find a sweet spot for where you're gaming at. If you're gaming at 4K, find a sweet spot for maybe 2400 megahertz, 25, depending on what cooler you have. You may even be able to push 2600 megahertz and stay at these junction temperatures, depending on what design card you have. But my whole theory behind this is that AMD drivers are what is causing these high junction temps. And that's because I feel like they are not taking in consideration what model cards you actually have. I think some are able to push a lot farther, and I think with these new GPUs, what they're doing is they're utilizing the drivers to push, you know, a lot of that performance out of the card for the boost. And look at this. Like I said, this is you know, no performance lost, 100 frames locked. I'm even getting way more utilization of my GPU. It's not throttling back as much. But also, the closer I get to that 2250, it's gonna, you know, my utilization's gonna shoot up because it thinks that's 100%. So it's really just what do you need? Performance, cooling, what do you want? You don't want 110 degree GPU junction temps. This is the way to go about it. Find a sweet spot. It doesn't have to be 2250. I just know that works for this game because I've tried it before. And you can do this on your 6800 XT, your 6900 XT, your 6700 XT. I've seen all cards have issues with junction temps or you know, just quote-unquote overheating in general, and a lot of misinformed people telling them, oh, that's not normal. And usually it's NVIDIA guys telling AMD guys like, hell, my GPU runs at, you know, 60 degrees, but they don't have the junction temp on their built into their software. Well, that's it for today. That's some things you can do. Undervolt, overclock, underclock. I mean, you have all the tuning there for you, and that's why it was put there. These are definitely tuner cards. You know, yes, would we like to take AMD to take more into consideration what card we have, and yeah, blah blah, a perfect world, whatever. But this is a way, if you are having these issues, which you may not, because AMD obviously over time they're going to figure out ways to kind of reduce these issues. And you know, that's a good thing, but you know, a lot of us are facing these issues, and this is some ways that you can solve it, keep them down, and just kind of letting you know that you do not need to worry, do not panic, do not throw your card away, do not sell it to somebody else because you think there's something wrong with it, do not take it apart. This is what it is. Well, that's me, guys. I'm out. Hopefully this video wasn't too lengthy. I know it's going to be a long one. But I just feel like this kind of stuff needed to be out there, and just some informative information. You know, just kind of going in detail. Alright, guys. I will see you later. Peace out.